Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny, and this is We Gotta Talk, a live weekly digital talk show and podcast where we like to dig deep. Real talk, big topics. Now, let's dig in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to season 4 of We Gotta Talk. I'm so glad you're here. It's been really fun putting together guests for this season. And just a heads up before we get into today's interview that sort of what you can expect as we kick things off officially for season 4 is it really took into consideration a lot of the topics that you guys were telling me you wanted to hear more about. And some topics that are a little more difficult to discuss than others, a little more uncomfortable at times, and some that just, are fun and frivolous and superficial, which we're also always here for. We need a little levity every now and then. But this season, you are going to be hearing from some really amazing experts in their respective fields or people who are heading up their own groups and organizations that are making a change and making a difference in this world. So you will get the full range, as always, this season on We Gotta Talk, from the more serious to the more fun. And today's guest is someone that is bringing some really necessary information. I have been following the Consent Parenting Instagram account, for years now. And the founder is here today. Her name is Rosalia Rivera. She is an educator. She's a child sexual abuse prevention specialist. And she's the founder, as I said, of Consent Parenting. They also have a podcast called About Consent. She's the co-founder of the global Brave movement to end child sexual abuse. And she is also the co-founder of the Survivors Council of Canada. Now, you need to stop what you're doing, hit pause, follow Consent Parenting, please. It is an irreplaceable resource, but come back because this interview is just absolutely necessary information for parents. Rosalia, thank you so much for joining me on the first episode of season 4.
Well, it's an honor. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
You have been very candid about your own experience of survival and the trauma you experienced with sexual abuse as a child. And you've taken your trauma and turned it into a vital education source for parents and guardians. I kind of want to start at the beginning of why and how consent parenting was formed and what it is about your approach that makes it a little different and unique in a space that's frankly really, really difficult for people to mentally inhabit.
Yeah. Well, sure. So I started because I'm a mom. I have 3 children. And at the time when I was stepping into this work, I was actually in the marketing industry. I worked as a creative director and had my own marketing agency. And I had done that for almost 18 years within that space. So different aspects of marketing and advertising. I actually come from New York and worked in that space. So it wasn't anything that I was really consciously trying to do in terms of consent education. I was new to it at the time. And my son was 5 years old. My oldest was 5 years old at the time. And I wanted to put him into a summer day camp. And when I was going to do that, about a few days before he actually started, I started kind of having this anxiety kind of rise up in me. And I wasn't really even sure why. And I started realizing it was like I was very nervous about sending him somewhere where I actually didn't know everybody. And I didn't really know if my son was going to be safe. And was I putting him in the care of, people who were safe? And so it started opening this conversation in my mind about, how could I have not prepared and how can I make sure that he's safe? And I really started digging into body safety education. And as I started doing that, I started realizing I was getting really triggered by it. And I kind of was trying to figure out why was this so intense for me? And it came to a head when I realized that a lot of memories that I had of my own childhood, which had been buried, some memories that just didn't make sense to me, all kind of came to the surface. And I think this is quite a common experience for a lot of parents who are survivors, where they start to have memories surface of their own trauma, same age as their child is now, when it happened to them when they were children. And so I started realizing I want to do this work, obviously, because I don't want the same thing to happen to my child. I want to make sure that I'm educating myself, but I'm finding it really triggering and difficult. And so I started seeking out mental health support, and I went to a hypnotherapist. I went for, various years of therapy, and being able to then really start to continue doing this work, educating myself, being able to see that, I can do this, I can
Mhm.
teach my children, I can do it from a place of empowerment instead of fear and
Mhm.
being triggered. And then once I was ready to, really establish this as something I could help other parents with, I realized that there was a gap for parents who were survivors as well. And that's where consent parenting was sort of born from.
Couldn't we rewind and just, to the level of comfort that you have with this topic,
Sure.
what it felt like to remember that abuse? You often hear the phrase, "The body keeps the score." It's the title of a
Hmm.
wildly popular book, and we hear a lot about our ability as humans to unintentionally bury traumatic memories.
Yeah.
So I guess when I'm hearing you, I'm curious what that realization felt like. Was it imagery that came up when you realized what had happened to you? Was it a sensation? Did it only come out in hypnotherapy?
Yeah, it was actually a bit of both. And part of it was also because I knew that my sister was, my sister's also a survivor, and she's given me permission to share her story now. Because I knew that before. I knew that my
Mm.
sister had been abused. We had found out about that years prior to me becoming a parent. It was actually around the time when she was becoming a parent that she was sharing her story about it. And so I started kind of recognizing, like, this happened to my sister. And then when the memories surfaced for me, it made sense because it's the same abuser, our father. And so it kind of hit me like a bag of bricks. It was just
Oh my
like
God.
really
Yes.
this really intense realization. Like, it just made a lot of sense. And so physically I was, really triggered, like the anxiety levels. I had a panic attack. It was like a lot of physiological, responses to these memories surfacing, and just, little bits of memories. It wasn't like a lot. And I still have, I'm sure I still have a lot of blocked memories. I'm not consciously trying to dig them up because I don't want to necessarily remember. I remember enough to know this
Right.
definitely happened. There's so many pieces that started to make sense. Like, I remember, my dad wanting to take me to Disney World. He had gotten this award from his business company that he worked at, and they had, it was two tickets. It was, and he wanted to take me, and I just remember not wanting to go. And I didn't, looking back, I didn't remember why. I remember asking my mom, like, not to let me go, and she didn't understand, like, why I wouldn't want to go to Disney. I was about 10 years old. And, just like things like that just started surfacing, and it made sense connected to the other memories that came up. So
Mhm.
that when I went to a hypnotherapist, I really just wanted to confirm. It was like, is this real, or am I like making things up? You just get really confused, and you really disoriented, by a lot of the things that kind of come up. So it was
And
really helpful to get someone, to help me with that.
right, and I would imagine too that your sort of conscious mind is trying to square its experience with maybe positive memories you also had of your abuser with this monster
Yeah.
image, which is unfortunately, as we know, that duality can exist in people. So I can imagine that that would be really difficult to kind of try to reconcile those two versions of your father that clearly existed.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I remember. I mean, I hadn't spoken to my father in years at that point, anyway, because of what happened with my sister. And he, when I had confronted him about what my sister had told me, he initially denied it, and I knew that he was lying. I just, in my gut, knew, and I
Yeah.
knew my sister wouldn't lie about something like that. So when I had confronted him and he had denied it, I decided that I was going to sever ways, because I knew that he was lying, and I knew that, he was a toxic person. Like, my parents had split up when we were young, and fortunately that divorce helped prevent me from having many more years of abuse happen. So
Right.
I think a part of it was also that I didn't have that connection with him, and so a lot of the sort of good memories that I had were kind of pushed to the side anyway. And it was
Mhm.
really just this confirmation of, like, absolutely, this has to be real, because it would make sense that I was the next. I was younger than my sister, so I was sort of that next in line
Mhm.
victim. And so it was just, I think it was saddening. I think there was a lot of sadness more than anything.
Right.
And also, of course, anger and frustration that he had continued to do this. And I am actually in the process of currently debating, like, do I want to pursue legal action? Because I'm at the point where I want to make sure he's not doing it to anyone else. And also there's a lot of conflict of, like, what's that going to do in terms of his family? I'm sure, my father's side of the family, I'm sure, is going to protect him, as most families of abusers do. Unfortunately, is that it's very hard for them to believe that someone they know could do this. And so I know I'm going to be up against, the sort of backlash from family members, and even people who know him, who are friends, that they will have to sort of reckon with that, right? So there's
Yeah.
a lot to consider when you're pursuing a legal action case on something that happens that many years ago, and it's particularly within the family.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a similar incident, and it's someone that we knew personally, and, the trial happened and it divided everyone. And
Hmm.
I hate to, like, gosh, you never ever want to leave space to defend a predator, but these people obviously have had completely different experiences with this adult than the child has. It's just it really blew my mind, because as a
Yeah.
parent, my instinct, and I'm sure yours is, and every parent's, is like, if my kid said the sky was neon green, I'd be like, "Yep, it is." Like, I believe them. I believe their perception of the world. I believe that no child can be motivated to lie. I mean, I don't want to get into, like, I'm sure there are instances, and I'm thinking of, like, the craze that went through, I think it was like England in the 80s, where, like, the satanic panic kind of things, but that's a different
Hmm.
discussion. But, like, no kid could be motivated to lie about this, is what I'm saying. And I can.
Yeah. Well, statistically speaking, it's only 1 to 2% of cases that are actually fraudulent, right? And so that's a very, like, we're talking about 98% of kids who, tell this, are
Mhm.
telling the truth. And that 1 to 2% is usually motivated by,
Another
usually
adult.
another adult. Yeah.
Right, and
So
it's usually to, like, for a gain of their own personal desire too, like money
yeah,
or influence or something, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so it's something that, I think even for people as adults, when they're sharing this, like, it's incredibly difficult to come forward about something like this. Like, what adult wants to, what's the gain that they're going to get? Like, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, they're going to ruin that person's life. Well, that person ruined their life and they're
yeah,
actually trying to still pick up the pieces, right? So I think, we have to, at least at the very minimum, give survivors the benefit of acknowledging their experience, and saying, well, they're coming forward for some reason. It's
mhm.
likely that it is true, and we should at least give them that support.
Absolutely. I mean, I see no other option. I mean, I have been friends with people who have waited years, often into their adult lives, to come out, similar to maybe your story, with their own experience. And I wonder if you could speak to the people who are really resonating with what you're saying right now. Maybe they were a victim of childhood sexual abuse, but haven't had the courage to name the person because of fear of disrupting a family dynamic or a social circle, or who maybe just have so much shame attached to it. What can you say to those people who want to air this and who want to start healing, but are stuck at that first step?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have support, to know that you have some support first, because it's incredibly courageous to come out and share about this. Not because there's anything shameful about what happened, in terms of you had no part in that, right? I think a lot of survivors feel guilty that, like, if they were children and they didn't tell anybody, then, people, what are people going to think? Or people are going to say, why didn't you say something sooner? Or, why would you come out with it now? Why don't you just let it go if it was so long ago in the past, right? There's so many unfortunate responses that people do get, and that victims, or survivors do expect. So that prevents them from wanting to say anything. And
Mhm.
just the fear of being blamed, there's so much victim blaming that still happens today. So I completely understand if you're in that space thinking, I want to finally say something, but I'm still afraid to. the first step is really to get support. Talk to someone who you trust, and talk to someone who is going to believe you and support you. And that's a very first sort of step that you can take to go, okay, I think I can do this. I think I have someone, who's got my back and can help me in this journey, because it is a journey.
Yeah. And who was that person for you? Your sister, or who was the person that sort of you felt like gave you permission to share?
I think it was a combination of my husband, who's very understanding and supportive, and also my family, like my sister, and just being like saying, "I'm going to come out with this."
Mhm.
I don't want to protect him anymore,
Right.
because in a way, like, you feel like you're protecting him by not saying something and being public about it. Because people have this perception of who that person is, right? And
Mhm.
unfortunately, offenders are really, really good at grooming not just the children, but the people in their children's lives, and the communities at large. I mean, our church that we went to every Sunday thought he was such a stand-up person and such a honorable man. And so, they actively do this so that it is hard for people to believe when a child comes out about it and says, or even an adult, "Oh, but he's such a nice person." I mean, you look at Larry Nassar, he was the founder of an autism center in his community. Like, nobody looked at that and said, "Oh, of course he's an offender." Like, it was the complete opposite. Like, nobody wanted to believe it. So
Mhm.
for survivors, like, that's what they're up against a lot of times. It's like these people who really worked hard to create
Mhm.
these squeaky clean images so that nobody believes them, right? And so that was part of getting that permission also from my family to say, "Look, I'm going to come out with this, and are you okay with that? Because you're obviously part of this family." So it was something that they felt, they really encouraged me to do it if I felt like I wanted to do it. And
Mhm.
I think it's been healing for them even as well,
Right.
because in sharing my story and sharing their story, I mean, my mom was, in a sense, a survivor of him as well, because I know that she wasn't always like, I think a lot of people forget that marital rape is a real thing, and
Mhm.
it's not, something that people really understand or talk about very often. So, I mean, he was just a serial offender. And so to me, I think it was healing for everybody involved who was part of that, you know, circle that he was abusing.
Yeah, it's always there's the sense of the unique sense of betrayal too. I'm sure of like them not being able to reconcile. Okay, wait, this isn't who I knew, and then you feel like was I a fool for 20 years? I was
Mhm.
married to this man, or I knew this person in our community or this church leader. So every it may this is what really pisses me off too, Rosalia. We are so eager to live in our comfort and to
Yeah.
live with our current version of who people are and how they are, that when we're challenged with that, then well, no, it can't be. Well, it can't be. He
Mhm.
volunteers 10 hours a week. Like that, I feel like is an important message for maybe this didn't touch your family specifically, this issue, but to hear you need to sit in that discomfort. If you hear this accusation about someone you may think very highly of, sit in that
Yeah.
and imagine what it must feel like for the child coming forward.
Mhm.
Kids are not going to invite this type. Kids don't understand drama really, but they would never invite that in without having a reason to. It just really, yeah, it's just the
Yeah.
whole idea of people worried about their image or about it's just really it's a frustrating
Yeah.
part of this discussion.
I love that you said that, like, people need to sit with the discomfort of that information, because I think that's part of what prevents people from wanting to accept this reality, is that like you said, it makes them confront their own experience of that person, and to challenge it and say, "Oh my gosh, is that really possible?" I think people just want to quickly dismiss it because it's such an ugly reality to have to face,
Mhm.
and it also challenges their sense of reality with all kinds of things, right? It's like, if I was fooled by that, what else am I being fooled by, right? So it's just
Right?
like, I don't want to, I'd rather not accept that that's real. So I think that I love that you said that, because yeah, people do really need to just sit with the discomfort and go, like, okay, maybe that is possible. And maybe this child really needs my support first, instead of looking at this adult and saying, "Oh no, that's impossible." Like, maybe it is possible. And when the more that we look at the news too, and case after case after case, this is
Mhm.
the classic pattern. People go, I can't believe I've known him all my life, or I grew up with him and we went to school together. There was this really amazing podcast, and for anyone who has the stomach to listen to it, it's called Hunting Warhead, and it's
Mm,
the story of this basically this pedophile who was running one of the largest dark web communities, forums of pedophile communities, before he got caught. But when they interviewed him after, and they interviewed people who knew him for years, including this one woman who was like friends with him from university or high school even, and then she ended up having a child, and he was still trying to sort of connect with her, found out that he almost abused her child, but she'd known him her whole life, and she was just so dumbfounded, like could not believe. She's like, I had him in my home, he like hung out with my child, I've known him forever, like I just could not believe it. And so this is how they operate. They try to like seem like a completely normal person
mhm.
who would never hurt anybody, who has no interest. And like we just have to open our eyes and realize that this is how they operate. So we can't, just dismiss it.
Let's keep on that vein of conversation. How groomers often draw in their victims. I'm sure anyone who's done even a modicum of reading on this topic has seen these crazy statistics that up to 90% of children who are victimized know their abuser, and it's very chilling. But what can we as parents look out for? Certain types of behaviors in adults or things that are happening that may indicate someone is attempting to groom a child.
Yeah, so grooming is something I'm like always happy to talk about because people don't know enough about it still. And it is exactly what you said. It's the way that they gain access to families and to children. And so what they are looking for are certain vulnerabilities. So an offender is going to look for a family that perhaps needs, maybe a mother who is either single, or the father's away for work a lot. They need a lot of support, whether that's financial or physically present to help with childcare and things like that. So they're looking for that. But even if you're a very affluent family, you could still be groomed, because they're looking at also the behaviors of the child, like what kind of temperament does the child have. Are they very shy? Are they not good at setting boundaries? Are they maybe lacking attention? Maybe there's parents that are working a lot and the child doesn't get enough sort of parent time, right? So those kinds of things. And that doesn't matter if it's like that doesn't have anything to do with socioeconomic status. So they're just looking for vulnerabilities that they can sort of find a way in. And if you're a parent and you get someone who's suddenly like constantly offering help and constantly offering to take your child somewhere, or to pick them up, or to like care for them, oh, why don't you guys go have a night out, and I'll take care of Johnny tonight. So if you're finding someone who's like constantly offering that up, that's a bit of a red flag. Another one is, they show a sort of inordinate like interest in your child, or wanting to spend a lot of time with them in ways that don't kind of seem that normal for an adult. Like most
Mm.
adults want to hang out with adults. And if you're finding that someone's like really good with kids and they would rather hang out with kids than you, like that's another red flag. If you're seeing that they're giving gifts to your child, particularly if they're maybe not telling they're telling the child not to necessarily tell the parent, and you find out about it, big red flag. Like, adults shouldn't be asking kids to keep any kind of secret, even if it seems like an innocent secret. That's kind of a gateway to test the child and see if they're willing to keep any kind of secret. Maybe they're not being educated. So they're looking for signs of like, body safety is not being taught in the home, and, kids aren't being taught how to set boundaries, or the child doesn't know how to set boundaries, and the parent isn't necessarily helping support, that kind of boundary setting. Anything that sort of seems like overly physical, where they're trying to sort of normalize touch with the child. So if there's a lot of tickling, or there's a lot of roughhousing, and there's a lot of, kind of touch that maybe seems a little overly affectionate, for a adult child relationship. Yeah, I think most parents would see that as a red flag. But even something like tickling and roughhousing, where
Mhm.
they're watching to see, is this child going to set a boundary? If they're uncomfortable, will they speak up? If they don't, well, that's a child they're going to want to target. So there's a lot of different things. I have a workshop on this because it, when a lot of parents will go, well, some of those things like I see my parents do, like grandparents are doing, like how can I tell the difference, right? And what I always say is, first of all, listen to your gut. And second of all, look at the pattern of signs, right? If you're seeing these as patterns and you're seeing them repeatedly and they may be increasing and you're seeing more and more of those signs, then definitely some type of grooming is potentially happening. And you want to, be able to intervene. This is an opportunity for you to say, okay, it's time for me to talk to this adult and say,
Mhm.
hey, FYI, we're, either teaching body safety or we're starting to teach body safety, and please respect our child's boundaries. If you want to go in for a tickle, make sure you're asking, and if they say no, please don't. So that's the kind of conversation you want to start having. You want to start intervening so that that grooming doesn't escalate and actually become abuse. And the last thing I do want to say also on that is
Yeah.
just look out for, like, is this, if I have a gut sense that something's off with this person, but I can't point to anything and they look like they're, overly like good, overly generous, like maybe they volunteer at a church, or maybe they're, doing all these things that look like you can't point a finger because they're just so squeaky clean. That's also to me another sign of like, I'm just going to be a little more vigilant with this person instead of giving them free rein with my child.
I you're talking and I'm like physically getting sick because there were so many times growing up, and thankfully I not did not experience sexual abuse that I'm conscious of, at least or recall, but I have had so many experiences where my body limits were pushed and I was uncomfortable, and it was not family members but even friends of like touching me and tickling me, and I remember feeling
Mhm.
so helpless. And it's even to this day, like I see one of my children being tickled and I have like a like it was a violation, and it was such a small violation relative to what could have happened, but still I knew as a child this isn't right, this person shouldn't be doing this, and I didn't say anything. And so now
Mhm.
when I see one of my kids being tickled, even if it's like from like a trusted family, I'm like, as soon as he or she says, you fucking stop, you stop. Like you don't know
Mhm.
what feel like, that feeling of helplessness over your body. I feel like so many women can relate to that. We've
Yeah.
all, not unfortunately, so many women can relate to it. That I love that you brought that up as a specific example. These behaviors were viewed as harmless in the 80s when I grew up, and in the
Yeah.
90s to an extent. And it was like, oh, well, Uncle Joe wants a hug, give him a hug. Or so and so wants to tickle you. Just it's not a big deal. Or and it's like, but it is. And
Yeah.
so the conversation, thanks in no small part to accounts and education like yours, is changing. And I love being able to give my kids the ability to say, hey, stop, and have an adult respond to that. And
Yeah.
then learn. Here's what I say. I'm like, listen, you may think this is silly, like, that I'm being extra vigilant about tickling or like, grabbing someone's shoulders. But my kids need to know that the behavior should be ask for it to stop and it stop. I don't want them to ever get comfortable letting something
Yeah.
continue that is uncomfortable to them. So it's just like makes me sick. There's just so many. Everybody has had that experience in a mild form, and teaching them at a young age that even small moments like that they can exercise their their autonomy is just so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And I think a lot of people don't realize how these small moments make a big difference. They help build courage muscles, they help build boundary setting muscles, they help kids understand how to respond if someone
Mhm.
doesn't respect the boundary that's being set, and how to address boundary crossings because they will happen, and that's not specifically sexual abuse related, but like just bullying, and just being able to speak up when something they don't feel comfortable with happens, and to be able to say, even to report after the fact, hey, I told them to stop and they didn't stop and I didn't know what to do, and then having that conversation and helping your child learn how to work through those situations, learn how to develop exit strategy skills and reporting skills, and
Mhm.
it's just to learn how to listen to their bodies and recognize early warning signs, and maybe even be able to prevent a situation from happening because they picked up on those signs and they
Mhm.
left before anything,
Yep.
so just all of these small moments, they're practice moments for the potential high stakes situation, so
Yeah.
I always talk about like just practice, practice, practice. Like
Yep.
this isn't just about having one or two conversations or reading one or two books. This is about ongoing daily situations with siblings, with, cousins, with, aunts and uncles, with grandparents, with teachers, like whoever
Mhm.
it is, let your child learn how to set boundaries and be okay with it as a parent for them to even set a
Mhm.
boundary with you because it makes a
Yes.
big difference.
Yes, teach them the tactics to set those boundaries and be okay saying no. Like, it's the extra built-in sort of pressure of girls always feeling like they have to obey the rules. It's just like an extra sort of challenge. But
Yeah.
you recommend this book on your feed, and I got it immediately when I saw it. It's called I Said No. And you speak specifically, and this book speaks specifically to what we're just talking about, exit strategies for kids. Can you run us through what exit strategies look like, and what we can tell our kids that they can say if they're in an uncomfortable situation to get out?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books, and I always say to parents, though, like, don't start with exit strategies because that can actually be a little bit scary for kids, and this is usually what parents are afraid of anyway, right? Like, they're like, "How do I talk to my kids without scaring them?" Do not start with exit strategies.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
this is something that you wanna teach after you've taught about, body autonomy, boundaries, consent, safe and unsafe touch, secret
mhm,
safety. Then we can get into exit strategies, right? Because that really involves talking to your kids about, like, if you have a funny feeling, if you see some red flags, right? So you have to teach what red flags are. So there's all these steps. Exit strategies are things that you want to be able to teach at the end. A 3-year-old isn't really going to be able to teach to get an exit strategy down, other than
mhm.
to be able to say no, which is really more boundary setting.
Right,
But
okay.
so just keep that in mind. I just want to preface with that. But exit strategies are essentially like the ways that a child, the behaviors that a child can implement
Mhm,
when they see red flags or they start to feel uncomfortable or they, recognize someone is doing something that's unsafe. This is what they would do to try to get out of that situation. But an exit strategy can also be what to do after a situation happens so it doesn't happen again, right? So
okay.
so even if your child is trapped in a situation, something unsafe happens, god forbid, it is abuse, and that happens, we want the child to be able to immediately report and
Mhm,
not be afraid to tell someone, not wait a week or days, or and to be able to report to a safe person, right? And to
yeah,
know that if that person doesn't believe you, keep telling. So that's still
mhm,
considered an exit strategy. But so essentially for kids, exit strategies look different for different ages. So, for a 6-year-old, it could be, listening to your early warning signs. Like if your, body's telling you this isn't safe, then getting out immediately, not waiting, not sticking
mhm,
around and saying, oh, well, these are my friends, or this is someone I love, or, just listening to that gut feeling that you have and getting out of the situation. So that, for a 6-year-old would be, running away,
mhm,
going to find an adult, getting out of, the room if the door is closed, like making
right,
sure that the door is open, like all of these kinds of things. For an older child, let's say like, someone, maybe a tween who has access to a phone, an exit strategy could be using like the X plan parenting
mhm,
strategy, which is based on a book by Bert Fulks. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this in different ways, but essentially the idea is if your child has a cell phone, they can text you the letter
mhm,
X if they feel like they're in an unsafe situation. And as soon as you get that, your child needs your help. You call them right away and you can make up whatever excuse you want. Oh, something happened, some emergency. I need to pick you up right away. Where are you? So that they have an out, and they, that way they don't alert the offender, or they don't alert their friends that, like, they recognize that they're unsafe. They're not sort of outing themselves in that way, and
yeah, they don't have to be
the
embarrassed.
parent, yeah, the parent can give them the out, and then they go and pick them up right away. Depending on the child, the age of your child, like if it's an older teen, they may have made a mistake and been like, I went to this party I shouldn't have gone and I didn't tell you about it. And, I think a lot of kids are afraid that they made a mistake, or they, didn't listen, or they broke a rule, and they're afraid of that out. So this is a way that you can give your child that out without, them feeling like they're going to get punished for having made a mistake. And unfortunately, a lot of times, especially for older kids, that's what happens, is that they go, I did this thing my mom said not to do. I put myself
Mhm.
in a situation that I shouldn't be in, and now I don't know how to get out. So you always want to give them a lifeline. And, that idea for that exit strategy is always something that they can count on to say, okay, my mom's
Mhm.
not going to punish me or yell at me. She's just going to get me out of the situation. Because you've had that conversation, and, you say, my priority is your safety, not to
Mhm.
punish you. Like for a lot of kids, that they've already been punished by the act itself of like
Right.
putting themselves in that situation, right? So they don't need you to punish them further, but this gives them that exit strategies that they really need, that could save their life. So there's different exit strategies for different ages. Again, it depends on, are you at school, are you at home, are you at a sleepover? Like you want to go through different kinds of scenarios at different stages, where your
Mhm.
child's going to be at a play date on their own, and how do they, access you, and do they have a safety network? A safety network is part of having an exit strategy, where you have different adults that you can reach out to. So if mom isn't answering, who
Mhm.
else can I contact,
Right.
that can come and get me?
Can we run through, Rosalia, sort of age bracket by age bracket, some great things that parents should be implementing? Like maybe we could say 0 to 3 and then 3 to 6. Like
Yeah.
you tell me, because I'd like to really serve all the parents out there. And like you said, you brought up a really good point in talking about exit strategies, which is this is like, this is for the older child. We're not starting here. So to really serve everybody who's listening, and I think there's a real eagerness for this information, maybe we start at the youngest age, what and when we tell kids, and then just kind of work our way through the high school age.
Yeah. So 0 to 3, you're basically starting with, um, really just talking to the adults in your child's life. So a lot of this also has to do with like who else you're talking to besides your child. So it's not just about educating your kids, it's about educating the people in your kids' lives. So whether that's caregivers, parents, grandparents, whoever it is that's going to be interacting with them. So
Mhm.
0 to 3 is really about, teaching them about body autonomy. And for, a child who's pre-verbal, who's obviously not even understanding everything you're saying, it's really about your intonation, your intention, the fact that you're communicating with your child when you're changing their diaper, instead of just doing it and not,
Mhm.
explaining what's going on.
Right.
You can start to, really just teach some of the basics. Your body belongs to you. You have a right to set boundaries. This is what boundaries are. This is, people should ask you before they, just go in for a hug or a kiss. That's called consent. So some of these basics kids can start to kind of understand between the ages of 2 and 3. This is also where they're probably starting to potty train. So this is where
Mhm.
you can start to introduce body literacy, which is, the foundation of sex education. So yeah, a lot of people go like, am I teaching sex ed to my 2-year-old? And it's like, well, body literacy is part of sex education. So literally, yes, you are. And that's okay. Like these are some of the important basics that kids need to understand about their body, right? So we want to normalize the correct names for body parts, not shame or try to create nicknames. Nicknames are not helpful at all, because if a child tries to report something and they're using nicknames, like, a person, maybe a teacher or whoever it is, might miss it, and
Mhm.
an offender might realize like, oh, there's some shame around these things, so I can, groom this child. So it can actually increase the likelihood of them being a target. So you know what, you want to start talking about body literacy, and then introduce the idea of safe and unsafe touch. So this is now going into, 3 to 6 years old. This is where you want to start introducing the idea of secret safety, helping them understand the difference between secrets, surprises, and privacy. Really helping them understand that concept, because that's a big part of what an offender uses to keep a secret, right? To keep them from telling. Helping them understand the concept of a tricky person, and then from there starting to understand the idea of intuition, listening to their body,
Mhm.
their feelings, the physical responses, early warning signs.
What's
So
a
all of
what's a
that
tricky
is,
person? Can you expound on that?
yeah, so a tricky person is, we see this in storylines all the time, right? Like there's someone who seems to be a good person, maybe they're behaving that way, they're kind of they're obviously lying about who they really are, and they have ulterior intentions. So for a kid, you could point to something like, The movie Frozen, where the prince in the first movie, he seemed
Mm,
like such a good guy, but he turned out to be a bad guy. So that would be a tricky person. So that's a really simple way to explain it to kids. It's like if you see a character, the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, right?
mhm.
Who
Oh, yeah.
pretended like so. There's tons of examples of that kids can really understand. Like, oh, this is someone who seems to be this way, but they actually turn out to be this way. And part of that is really to help kids go to a parent and say, my this person or my friend or my grandparent told me this and they said not to tell anyone. And it's like, but you told me no secrets and I don't know if they're a tricky person or not, so I'm checking with you. So you want kids to come back and verify things and not just take them at face value from people if
Mhm,
there's something that doesn't feel right, and especially if it's something that goes against a body safety rule, right? So helping kids understand that concept can really help them interrupt or disrupt a potential grooming pattern that's starting to happen.
mhm,
So you want to, help them understand that. And then understanding red flag signs, right? Like, so if somebody's asking me to do something and they're, saying, they're trying to bribe me or they're trying to threaten me or so helping them learn about those red flag signs. And that's that book, I Said No, really helps lay
yeah,
those kinds of things out, which is really great. So that's 3 to 6. And then 6 to 9, you're now starting to really begin to introduce more of those exit strategies, depending on their age, what kinds of exit strategies you want to introduce, and then how that kind of morphs into digital safety, online safety, porn safety,
mm.
exit strategies around like what happens if you come across inappropriate content or someone tries to show you inappropriate content. um, you know,
Wait, can we pause there for a second? I have a
yeah,
10-year-old. I have a 10-year-old, and this is sending shivers down my spine. I don't know how to talk to him about the big bad internet. Like I know we've talked about don't ever share your real name on Roblox or Fortnite, or we know the basics. We know that people aren't as they seem online. We've covered that. But the porn discussion and the I don't know who's showing him things. I know mostly what he's consuming at home. I'm hoping that I do, but what please give me a script. Just like lay it out for me, please. I don't know what to
yeah.
say, I don't know how to start it. And it's clear that this is going to be an issue soon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I so there's 2 really great books that I recommend. One is it's actually the same book, but it's set up for junior and teen and tween and teens. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and I actually changed the name to Safe Pictures and Unsafe Pictures because I really try to stay away from the term good and bad. It for various reasons, which I won't get into right now.
Right.
But those books are really helpful to introduce the idea of unsafe pictures. That if you come across these kinds of pictures, here's what to do.
Mhm.
And so I would recommend those books as really good starting points to this porn conversation, because I think a lot of people go, well, then I have to explain what porn is. And really, the thing is that you want to start with some of the basics around sex education, right? So I always say, because I am a sexual literacy advocate, I do believe
Mhm.
that kids should be given age appropriate, shame free, evidence informed information. And it starts with literacy, it starts with like body literacy. But then from there, you want to start talking about, reproduction. You want to start talking about this idea of sexual activity, which is something that only adults do with adults, that they don't do with children, that teens don't do with children. Like, this is, an activity that adults do. You can, depending on your child's age, you can talk about the fact that it's done for reproduction, and as they get a little bit older, you can talk about the fact that this is something that adults do for pleasure, but it's, again, only between consensual adults, not between. So you want to always introduce that factor of like safety and what's age appropriate and not age appropriate. So if you've had those conversations, before your child gets to 9 or 10, hopefully you can then introduce this idea of what porn is, which is essentially, this adult content that's created, that is really only for adults. It's not meant for kids to look at. It's not even realistic. So you can start to kind of introduce some of those ideas as your kid gets a little bit older. You can then start to, if they have questions about it, because unfortunately, inevitably, there's
Mm.
someone at school who's going to talk about it. It's who's
Yeah.
going to bring it up, who has been exposed to it, and they're going to ask about it, and they're going to come home and say, what is this and what is that, and you have to be prepared for that. So there's lots of books that I also recommend, which is why I have a book club, because there's so many great books out there that really get into the nitty gritty of it. And even workshops like Melissa Carnegie, founder of Sex Positive Parents, she just came out with a workshop on how to have these conversations, specifically porn conversations with kids that are age appropriate, and help them to understand it. Because here's the thing, you as a parent, if you shame them about these topics, they're just going to start going elsewhere for the information. So it's
Yeah.
better if you are open about it and you can be as sort of fact-based, neutral, and this is not to say that you're condoning it, because I
Mhm.
certainly don't condone it,
Right.
but it's really just to say, look, this is how people are unfortunately uneducated about it, how kids in particularly are uneducated about it, and so they think that it's okay, or they've seen it and they think it's okay, but it's actually not. And here's some more information about it, like it's bad
Okay.
for the developing brain, and it's not even realistic, like this is really
Mhm.
not even how people actually do. So there's a lot of conversations that you need to have. It's not one talk of like, here's the porn talk, like it's like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, wait. So here's what I'm thinking. Wait, I should have had this. Should I've had the birds and bees conversation? Let's like tap into your sexual literacy expertise for a second. Should I
Yeah.
have had the conversation before age 10 with my son? Like, and how
Yeah.
do I? Okay. Oh God. Okay, we got some work to do this weekend, Rosalie. Okay, and how? Like, can you just script me for that particular? Hey, buddy, there's something that Dad and I have been wanting to talk to you about, or just like
Yeah.
write it for me. Just give me 30 seconds, please.
Yeah. No worries. A lot of parents find themselves in the same shoes, so don't feel like, you missed the boat. There's always time, and it's never ever ever too late. So I just want to give parents that reassurance that, even if your child is 12 and you haven't had this conversation, it's never too late. So the way that I like to introduce these things is with books. It makes it so much easier for the parent. It gives them language, it gives them, visuals that the child can look at, that it opens up those conversations and questions. So what I would recommend, there's a really great book called It's Not the Stork. And that is a
It's
great
not.
book. It's for ages 4+, but I really think it's like 5 and up. 5 to 10 is a really great age range to read this book, even, for a 10-year-old. So they're going to
Okay.
probably find it very interesting. They're reading on their own too, so they're going to be able to like dig into the book and start to read it.
Mhm.
And you can use it as a great resource. It's not There's another book that's called It's Perfectly Normal, and that one is for really more, in my opinion, more for like 13 up. So it says it's 10 up, but I would say 13 up. But It's Not the Stork, fantastic starter for these conversations. It talks about the concept of reproduction, and obviously talks about the idea of sex, but it doesn't go overboard. It doesn't, it's just kind of like introduces it, and then
Mhm.
kids can start to ask questions from there. The more books that you have around these topics, the better. Because kids, you can say, okay, you know what, let's check this book and look at it
Mhm.
together, right? So it takes a lot of the pressure off of parents having to like come
Right.
up with everything and become an instant expert. You
Mhm.
have access to resources that can help you do that, and lots of videos too, like amaze.org also has some great videos that you can look up that will help you have some of these conversations as well.
Okay, amazed. Writing all this down. And guys, I'm going to put this in show notes too because I know there are other parents who are curious. And frankly, this is a part of I feel like the conversation we're having today too, which is the more educated kids are about their bodies and what should and shouldn't be happening, the more they can ultimately protect themselves. So thank you for working that in there. I know that was kind of like off the cuff. I do.
No
I like.
problem.
I do want to get into some questions that specifically came in from friends on Instagram, and we could I don't want to call it a lightning round, but we'll try to get through them rather on the quicker side because there's a lot, and there's still a couple other things I want to grab with you before we wrap up. So there was a lot of talk about the sleepover on Instagram, um, whether we should allow them, and if so, how to make them safe. So, can you kind of speak to both elements of that question?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. I don't think sleepovers are very safe, especially in 2023 for most kids, unless they are probably 12 and up, where kids have gone through all the body safety education, where they have the ability to exercise exit strategies. And only if after you have kind of done your due diligence of making sure that the home that they're going to is safe. So this means, finding out who lives there. Are there older siblings? What is the access that they have to the internet? Is there any kind of supervision? What's the online safety practices that they have in the home, especially if there is an older sibling?
Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of questions are really important for you to have the answers to before you can say yes to a sleepover. And if you are the one who's going to be hosting the sleepover because you feel that that's safer, making sure that you have certain practices in place. What is the sleeping arrangement going to be? Is it going to be, in the living room where everybody has sleeping bags, like a slumber
Mm-hmm.
party, or is it going to be in the bedroom? Is the door closed? Are you making sure that there's no devices that are available, that no kids are bringing devices? So having some of that basic understanding is going to be really important.
Okay. So, in other words, mostly they're a no go for you personally, but if you're going to do it, really, really vet the place
Yeah.
they'll be going. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Um, I feel like we covered this. Someone was asking how to approach the topic of like staying safe around potential predators with younger kids, but we kind of tapped into that. So I feel like we're covered there. The 50-50 rule, which is something that you've posted about on Instagram as well. Can you just quickly tell us about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I really I think that it's not just about teaching kids about body safety to make
Mhm.
sure that we reduce the risk, and that will help for sure. But more than anything, it's really we're teaching kids because we're helping them build skills and learning how to report, because kids can't prevent abuse. That's our job. And so what we also need to be doing is talking and educating the adults in our kids' lives who are interacting
Mhm.
with them. So if that's the teacher or a babysitter or a daycare team, like having the conversation and saying, we're teaching body safety at home. This is what it looks like. This is how we practice it. This is how we would love for you to be part of that. Do you have questions? Can I support you in this education?
Mhm.
Bringing body safety books to show and tell to help them
Mhm.
remember that you're having these, so this really helps to reduce the likelihood of your child being targeted by a predator, because predators are looking for the easiest target, and if your child's being educated, they're not an easy target. So we want
Mhm.
to, reduce that likelihood, but we also want to spread awareness and education of this, because the more eyes that our kids have on them, the
Mhm.
better it's going to be. That if grandma now knows what the grooming signs are, and she sees that so and so is potentially exhibiting these signs, she's going to alert you as the parent and say, hey,
Right.
I noticed these things, and you can then intervene or be more vigilant, or maybe not have unsupervised visits with that person. So
Right.
it really helps to create more of a what Feather Burkauer calls a prevention team,
Mhm.
and not just a safety network, but also a prevention team with you.
Yeah, people who know what your family's rules are and how to respect them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked how to talk about um, the dangers of certain adults, I guess, who haven't had the birds and bees talk yet. So, like, I guess they're asking how to teach people that there are bad people out there who might do bad things, but they haven't quite had the birds and bees talk yet. So they feel like they can't really correlate the two. What advice do you have for them?
Um, yeah, that's a tricky one, because I would say go back to that point and have that conversation, have the birds and bees conversation, and like just be upfront about the fact that you're uncomfortable having this because you weren't taught this, and so you're stepping into this conversation a little bit nervous, but you're confident that you're going to be learning this together, and that's really what's
Mhm.
important. So go back and do that, and then at the same
Right.
time talk about the concept of tricky people, really, because that's
Okay.
really kind of where that stems from. And
Mhm.
kids aren't going to go, well, is everybody a tricky person in the world? Because you're going to say no,
I'm
but
going to say
you want to.
yes. Live with mom forever. I'm just kidding. I'll keep you safe,
Or you
honey.
could say that too. But the
Overbearing
other,
mother here. Yeah.
yeah, well, the other thing too is just to say, like, just as we see in storylines, like not everybody has our best
Mhm.
intention, right? And so we want to make sure that we learn safety. That's the reason why we're talking about safety in the first place, is because there's most of the world is good,
Yeah.
but there's some people that aren't. And so we want to make sure that we can learn how to spot those people, so that we
Mhm.
can stay away from them, so that we can be safe, so that we,
Okay.
and if it's someone that you care about, and you realize that they're not behaving like a safe person, it might be because they need to learn how to behave like a safe person. And so it kind of takes some of that pressure away from the child to go, if Uncle so and so,
Yeah.
who I love, is starting to act weird, like, how do I tell mom without her, like,
Yeah.
punishing him or punishing me or whatever? And so the way that we present these conversations is important, like just being neutral, matter of fact, and saying, hey, not everybody knows about body safety, which is very true,
Mhm.
and so we want to let kids know we want them to be safe, and that's really all that matters at the end of the day for us, is their safety. And so no matter what it is, come and talk to me so that I can
Mhm.
help you navigate that situation.
Okay, one more quick Instagram question, and then we'll wrap things up here. The Treat Reward Association. I know you touched on this on your website a little bit too. As parents, we often motivate our kids through bribery. Let's be honest. And I'll give you a treat if you X Y
Hmm.
Z. Tell us about the dangers of the Treat Reward Association and what other options we can have to just straight up bribe our kids if we can't do that.
Well, I think it's important that we just have the awareness of it, because the more
Hmm.
awareness we have, the less we're actually going to do it anyway. But
Hmm.
I think it's just important to reward kids for their effort, and just to
Hmm.
say, more than just the treat itself. And just to start, like, I think it's really hard when kids are young and they're, in their toddler years, they're not thinking with their logical brain, right? They're mostly operating out of their animal brain. So it's not the easiest thing to do with a toddler. But as your child gets a little bit older, you want to start talking more about their responsibility over themselves, right? So a lot of times we want to say, oh, if you brush your teeth, then you'll
Hmm.
get extra 5 minutes of game time or whatever. We want to try to start staying away from that, just becoming more conscious of it, and just having more conversations with kids about, like, well, if your body belongs to you, that means you're responsible for your body. That means you have to start taking care of it. And if you don't want to brush your teeth, okay, it's
Right.
your body, and you're gonna, end up probably having cavities, but I'm gonna have to start pulling the candy, because
Hmm.
if you're not brushing your teeth, candy's making it worse. So we're gonna have to cut out the candy. So you're actually
Yeah.
just helping them understand natural consequences to behavior, instead of the reward treat situation, which actually just makes them go, okay, well, if I do this, then I get this, because we're kind of setting them up for grooming by doing that. So we just have to be conscious of it and find different ways to motivate them, which is more about helping them understand, if my body belongs to me, which a lot of kids will pull, they'll be like, well, it's my body and I don't want to
Right.
shower today. So, well, okay, that's fine. But
Right.
then, these are going to be the natural consequences. So not punishing them, but not necessarily rewarding the behavior, just helping them to see the connections to why certain things have to happen. Well, if you don't want to put your seatbelt on, then we're not going to be able to leave and go to XYZ place, right? So
Mhm.
just trying to get creative, depending on the situation, thinking ahead, so that you can figure out, like, what's the incentive for them to have a good consequence or a bad consequence that's
Mhm.
natural to the situation.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, all of this makes sense, and it really your advice really dovetails with, like, really practical parenting advice too, like natural consequences and telling kids what things really are rather than a fake story. So, it
Yeah.
all kind of see the broader picture when you
Yeah.
dive into this. I guess as a final thought here, Rosalie, I would like to leave parents with um not a hope, that's the wrong word, but a little bit of optimism that they can protect their kids. I know, raising three kids myself, that it often feels like the deck is stacked, right? We're worried about their safety. We're worried about, people trying to hurt them. We're worried about really everything, their health and the people that they're hanging out with. And if they're getting bullied, it can feel like, if you're not doing 1,000 things every day to preemptively help and advise and protect them, that we're going to drop the ball. So I guess what I'd like to end with is just some encouraging words for parents, understanding that this is a reality that unfortunately exists, but what we can do to protect them, and how to keep our spirits sort of positive while we are.
Yeah, so I think first is looking is the perspective we have. Just look at it just the same as you would with, they have to wear a bike helmet, and they have to
Mhm.
get, like, learn how to swim so that they don't drown in a pool. Like, there's just some things that we have to do, and this is just one of them. And
Mhm.
at the same time, we don't have to look at this negatively and say, oh, I have to
Mhm.
teach my child about these horrible dangers in the world. It actually is about teaching them about their rights. And if we look at it from the perspective of,
Mhm.
they have body rights, and if they learn about those body rights early, that's super empowering for a child, right? Because
Mhm.
we have to remember, the perspective is like, they're little, we're big, we always seem
Mhm.
like, the authoritarian here, but we can actually give them that sense of autonomy that helps them develop, boundary setting skills, which are incredibly important in relationships. So just even that, aside from, not thinking about sexual abuse, but just thinking about how empowering this education is going to be for your child, and how it even helps you as a parent learn how to set boundaries in your own life. Like you're going to
Mm,
end up examining a lot of the values around
yes.
that, around, your sexual education values, around, how you perceive people and being more aware and like leaving your cognitive biases behind. Like there's such an amazing educational process that you go through. It doesn't have to be scary if you just shift your perspective to looking at this as something that's empowering and ultimately is going to give your kids life skills that they can pass on generation after generation. How amazing is that going to be that
Hmm.
in 20 years from now the world could be different because of how you educated your child?
It's amazing. It's like it makes me a little like sappy and weepy to think about it because we do learn with every generation, and
Yeah.
it can be emotional too because, like you said, when you start to examine the things that we experienced or were taught, and you realize, of course, our parents were doing their best, and there's no way that even with the quote unquote best parenting we can prevent everything. But like
Yeah.
you start to realize you I don't know, you heal yourself and you
Mhm.
re-experience the emotion sometimes, but like you said, it leaves you with that little bit of optimism that, okay, at least I know now a little bit better. Every year, every generation, every
Yeah.
set of parents and children, we can do a little bit better. So
Yeah, and you'll grow with it every year. It's not anything that, you're gonna learn overnight and you're gonna get right away, and you're not gonna be perfect and you're gonna make mistakes, and all of that is okay. It's part of the process, and there's no way to circumvent that other than to just, take baby steps,
right.
one step at a time. And if you, want to dive into it, more power to you. If you can't and you need to take baby steps, that's okay too. Just go at your
Hmm.
your process and your steps. Just don't stop. Like that's what I
Hmm.
always say to people. If you find yourself stopping, it's probably because you need some additional support. So seek the support that you need in order to continue doing this education, whether that's, mental health support or getting a support team with you, groups of friends or a partner, like whoever it is. Make sure that you have the support to keep doing this if you feel like you're struggling and you feel like you're going to stop, because that's where you are going to say, okay, I need help because I don't want to stop doing this, but I don't know how to keep doing it. And so, finding resources that are also, if you are a survivor, that are trauma informed, that can help you
Right.
through that process. But just don't quit. That's really
Yeah.
the only thing. Yeah.
You have been amazing and so generous with your wisdom and your tips. Rosalia, please tell us where people who want to learn more about you and your group can go to find more.
Sure, thank you. So it's consentparenting.com is my website, and I have tons of resources there, blogs and PDFs you can download, workshops, and you can also listen to my podcast about consent.com. So those are the two main places. But I'm also really active on Instagram, so if you want to reach out,
Yes.
you can DM me there.
The best follow, guys. Please on Instagram, give her a follow and check out like the whole library of content is just amazing. Rosalia, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you guys for watching and or listening. We had a great live crowd today, and I'm grateful for you having been here. I'm grateful you're here for the start of this season. I feel like we are off to an amazing start with information that will empower you and help you just do things just a little bit better. So thank you for joining us. Rate and review as always, guys. Thank you, and we'll see you next week with more good stuff here on We Gotta Talk.